Yep, you guessed it. More automation coming to America. This is from Monroe, Ohio, talking about Kroger opened America's first automated warehouse in Monroe this week. It says here the $55 million automated warehouse that exists now in Butler County. In the 335,000 square foot customer fulfillment center, it says features of digital and robotic capabilities that allow Kroger to assemble an order of approximately 50 items in 6 minutes with robotics instead of approximately 30 to 45 minutes with a Kroger employee picking them up at various areas of the store. Now, this should be obvious to many. As it says here, it's set to employ more than 400 people. Now, of course, we'd have to look back and see how many people it employed before or how many their previous warehouses employed. More than likely, you'll see a lot less of these manual, unskilled sort of jobs basically going towards automation as the rise of labor starts to go up, especially because, the Democrats are trying to increase the minimum wage. And of course, all that does is pushes unskilled labor out of the market, right? Because especially depending upon the people's color, and which is originally why you had things like the minimum wage, which was basically to push out minorities, primarily blacks, out of the job market. So that why would I hire an unskilled black person at whatever price, when I can hire maybe somebody who is like white, Asian, or whatever. And so instead of having the ability to negotiate prices and say, well, hey, I'll work for you for 12 or I'll work for you for 10, because at the very least you get something. I mean, shoot, when I first started working, I was working for $4 an hour. And after 3 years, I was able to move my way up. And then eventually I just started my own business. And so I went from working for $4 to $4.50, 5 to 6 to 7. And then eventually I started my own business and I was making like 90 an hour at the age of 17. And that comes when you acquire a skill. You work for someone for several years, you start to know the ins and outs of how the business works. You fill the niche maybe in a different area of part of where you live, or in a different state, or in a different country, etc. And as a result, you start to gain market share. And when you gain market share, you start to earn more money, and then you basically just begin to scale up. Now, of course, when labor becomes expensive, especially manual labor of unskilled individuals, all that happens is that businesses will seek to automate. Now, because of many Americans gave up their freedom to be able to move about and do business, a lot of you allowed your stores and businesses to be closed, or you allowed your place of business or the place where you worked at basically to close as a result of government oppression. You basically lost freedoms. And as a result of that, it will impact much of what's going on within the job market. Now, for a lot of women, and I talked about this in my last video, or in one of my last videos, I should say, about how you're seeing a bit more of a push towards the over sexualization of women, pushing women out. They're not necessarily as we're dancing in the videos, but now many of these women are looking to things like OnlyFans or just straight forms of prostitution, whether it's selling videos or actually selling themselves for money, because many of them have been impacted. Like I said before, most of the women work in areas that are not necessarily essential, and even those jobs nowadays are going towards automation. Here's an example. Talking about robo-waiters prove to be a necessity for contactless Portland, Ohio bistro. About 1 year into the virus pandemic, the return of normalcy for the restaurant industry is unlikely. With more than 100,000 closures, restaurants have already failed, revenues remain collapsed, right? And so instead of having to pay someone who may or may not be able to give the type of service that you're looking for, they may show up late, they may fall ill, etc. You may have to pay for health insurance, you may have to pay them a salary. Instead, what they're doing is now they're going towards the way of automation because of the virus. And so, of course, for many of these liberals who want to talk about these things, that this is just fantastic for, so people don't get sick. And then it's like, well, what do you do with the lack of jobs when people lose their jobs? And overwhelmingly, it's women who typically work in these areas, and these in the service industry, primarily dominated by women. And so now you have robotics that are basically pushing out and driving out women in this area of the workplace. It says there was a glimmer of hope on Friday, with some 75% of all U.S. job gains in February were waiters and waitresses. And that's overwhelmingly where most of the jobs, but these are typically not very high paying jobs. It says the C-19 has cleared the way for restaurant automation. There's automated kiosks, automated bartenders, Flippy the hamburger robot, automated pizza kitchens, and the list goes on and on how restaurant operators who survived lockdowns are finding digital solutions for ordering, food preparation, delivery, and even serving. While health experts are suggesting people stay at least 6 feet from others, one restaurant in Portland, Oregon has found an innovative way to serve food without face-to-face interaction with patrons. And of course, that will impact the dining experience. Not only that, it'll also cause job losses. And then you can see right here, this is what the robot looks like. Right? So a person will be sitting by themselves, and then it'll basically bring over the food to them. It says here, the restaurant uses autonomous robots to minimize customer interaction between staff and customers while serving. So for a lot of men who are looking for work, you may get into maybe repairs, right? Sometimes you just have to move with the times. And so it may require you to become more skilled in things like robotics. And so while many of these unskilled jobs, like for example, serving food or just working in a warehouse and grabbing packages and moving packages and storing things, will go by the wayside, as men, we have to learn to adapt so that individuals can survive, which is why at times like this, it's very good. At times like this, it's good to consider acquiring a skill and then starting your own business so that you're able to kind of displace yourself from, unfortunately, losing your job. You're able to create your own work. Now, for many individuals who are happy that the government passed stimulus, right? Because maybe some of you need the unemployment. Some individuals, because of loss of income, require a little bit of extra stimulus. But it's important to understand what the overall impact is of stimulus. And we're actually going to look at it from the standpoint of an entire continent of Africa. So way back when, the Wall Street Journal did an article, which I will leave a link to all these articles in the description, talking about why foreign aid is hurting Africa. And of course, as it says here, it says money from rich countries has trapped many African nations in a cycle of corruption, slower economic growth, and poverty. Cutting off the flow would be far more beneficial, says Dambisa Moyo. It goes on to say in this particular article about how many of the foreign aid that comes to the country, of course, comes in the form of debt, right? So when all these different countries give them aid, they eventually, of course, have to either pay this back, or as a result, prices start to rise, right? Because now there's more liquidity that's basically slushing around the country. And so all this does is drive the prices of assets. That's why the stock market is going up, is because a lot of the debt that is being created is basically getting funneled in one way, shape, or form into the stock market. For many individuals who will be getting unemployment or some sort of stimulus check, most of a lot of that may go to individuals who own assets, like if you're paying your rent or electricity, or if you're buying food, right? Those are all the businesses, right? The businesses of food production, of energy production, housing are all considered assets. The stock market is also considered, when you're buying shares of a particular company, you're buying, in essence, financial assets. And of course, these things either pay dividends, pay back money in the form of dividends, which is just basically a payout for owning a portion of the business. The company shares a bit of the profits with their shareholders, or you get price appreciation, which you can sell your shares if you wanted to, and then you get capital gains. And that's how individuals, of course, make money within the stock market. And there's various ways, but that's just one in particular. And so as a result of rising liquidity, because there's a lot more money now in the system, assets, right, stock prices, financial assets start to rise as a result of individuals receiving too much money in, for example, who are getting, unemployment, and there's not enough people working. Then what you just have is a simple supply and demand. You still have everybody who are receiving funds from the government, and that helps to maintain supply. And it helps to maintain demand. But since you have less people who are working, now your supply of foods and services are reduced. And so what that does is it causes prices to rise. And so the more that the government injects into the market or into the economy, just causes prices to rise. Like you can look at housing, right? Because of having interest rates really, really, really low and artificially keeping people from going homeless due to the moratoriums, that has caused an asset as a home, which can be utilized as an asset, I should say, it has caused the price of those homes to rise. But you have low, free, almost free interest-free loans from the government, and as a result, now the prices of homes start to rise because now these individuals have access to more finances. Now, of course, it just puts them in more debt, and that's all that it does. That's the point, is to keep people debt-ridden, and we'll eventually see more of that moving forward. But I found this article quite interesting, that you typically see this in many of these places where you get many philanthropists like Bill Gates, who are always talking about, we need to send foreign aid to these different countries instead of allowing them to grow, kind of like the Bible says that, if you basically just give stuff to people, they eventually, it's not to their benefit. Giving things to people, the Bible always promoted hard work and innovation. And of course, these individuals know this, and just to artificially keep Africa down, instead of being a rich industrial country, is basically a country that has become dependent. Not surprising that many Black Americans are also in that exact same predicament, with a lot of the aid in terms of welfare programs mostly going to women, but primarily going to Black women. And of course, we would not want to think that, of course, this is not by design, as this information is very well known, that this sort of mentality, or basically just giving people aid, it makes people dependent. And of course, it causes asset prices to rise, which benefits the wealthy, right? Because if I'm a farmer, right, let's just say I'm a farmer, I own a farm. Now that I know that you people start to have more money, it just basically, the market will bear what the market will bear. So that just causes food prices to rise, the price of meat or the price of milk or the price of eggs, right? It's because more people have more money. So now I know that I can charge more because the market will be able to bear it. And as a result, because I own the asset, I now become wealthier. I gain a larger market share of the fiat currency that is out there that you people refer to money. And so that allows me to expand the amount of food that I'm able to produce. We've seen the same thing in lumber, etc. These are important things that are important to understand, that a lot of what is going on is by design. It's creating a greater rift within America between those who have and those who don't. It's important to pay attention to the narrative of what's going on in the stock market, within businesses, so that you're able to put yourself in the best position moving forward, especially as a man, because we don't have a safety net. For men, there is no safety net. We're not women who can rely and appeal to the government saying, give me stuff, because men are disposable. It doesn't take that many men to be able to impregnate multiple women. It's important to understand that from a biological perspective. We, as red pill men, they often talk about, how you have many of these women, especially lower quality women, that end up getting pregnant by multiple baby daddies, right? And so it doesn't take many men to be able to just impregnate, these different women. One man can have, right, look like Future, one man can have babies with multiple women, right? And so they can basically help to keep the population higher. Now, of course, that has genetic effects, but that's not another topic for another discussion. But I think it's important to understand this moving forward, that many of the lower rung jobs are there's either going to be too much of a demand. I should say there's going to be too much of a supply for them. You have a lot of people, in essence, working for companies like Amazon that are just basically enriching Jeff Bezos. And of course, they're not really all that well paying. Sure, they might be $15, $16, $17, $18, but with rising costs and inflation moving forward, A lot of those jobs aren't necessarily are going to be what's going to put food and keep you in a stable environment moving forward. So I would definitely want to teach many of you individuals to pay attention to these things. It is definitely by design what we are seeing as a result of the outcome of what they did to the economy. They've destroyed the American economy. And moving forward, many of these jobs, unfortunately, are not coming back. They will not exist. Many of these service industry, retail jobs, it will take maybe a decade for many of these jobs to come back, if they come back as a result. And during that time period, we can lean more on automation, reducing the amount of skilled labor, putting you at risk for being displaced. That's the unfortunate reality of what happens when you have given up your freedom to the government. The government just basically treats you like a slave.